Okay, this will be my first attempt at making a YouTube video. What we're going to do today is a little springtime project, a little welding and grinding and cutting. And what we're going to do is we're going to make a replacement for these wooden butterflies. We've had these things for years, and while they might look pretty good on camera, as you can see up close, they're getting pretty weathered. They were made pretty much just out of plywood years ago. They've lasted for quite some time, and what we're going to do is replicate the big one like we did the small one. As you can see, I've already made the small one, and it is a metal butterfly that we could either paint or torch it to blue it, give it some pretty colors. But at any rate, that's what we're going to do. So we'll get started on that now. To get started, we're going to disassemble this butterfly so that we can use the pieces and components of it to make a template. What we're going to make the butterfly out of is going to be this old piece of steel that used to be a door on the smoker that I had made some years ago and have since replaced. So we'll get started with disassembly of the butterfly now. So as you can see, we have some pretty simple components here that make up the pieces of this butterfly. For the wings, which are pretty straightforward, pretty simple. It's going to be pretty easy to recreate. We have the body of the butterfly with one of the antennas broken off from years of being outside, and the other wing. So we'll get started taking the metal and transferring these butterfly wings and the body to the metal once we get the metal cleaned up. As you can see, it's in pretty rough shape right now, but we'll clean it up, get it ready to transfer those parts. Okay, so we haven't cleaned up all the metal, but we've cleaned it up enough to be able to mark on it and be able to see our marks. And we've cleaned up enough to be able to get both of the pieces on there to use as a pattern for the wings. Now we'll go ahead and mark it out and start cutting the metal to get the pieces cut out. Okay, now that we have the basic shapes cut out, we'll break out the portaband and set it up so that we can start refining the shapes into the actual butterfly wing shapes. Okay, so now that I have the wings cut out to their basic shape, then I'll clamp them together in the vise and use a grinder to grind them to the same shape. So as you can see, even though they look like they were the same, they're not, and we'll still have to spend some time cleaning them up. But we're well on our way. So now we'll clamp them in the vise and use a grinder to shape them so that they're the same. Okay, so now having ground them together, they are pretty much identically the same, and all we need to do now is clean them up, and then we'll be ready to put them on the butterfly's body once we have that made. So we'll move on to making the butterfly's body now. Okay, to make the butterfly's body, I'm going to use these 3 pieces of scrap metal and cut them to piece together and make the body out of that. And we'll get started doing that now. Okay, so now after having stitched those pieces together and then ground it to shape it and profile it a little bit, it's still very hot, but after having ground and shaped it a little bit to give it the profile of the body, now we're pretty much ready, once I clean up the wings, to weld the body and the wings together. So we'll get moving on those parts. Okay, so we have our parts cut out, cleaned up a little bit. I'll probably sand the wings a little because they were pretty greasy from being inside the smoker back in the day. And so I'll probably sand these parts down to make them nice and shiny. But for the most part, they're cleaned up. Just have some residual high temp paint on them. And I need to clean the edges up because they're still a little bit sharp. So we'll move on with that. I'll go ahead and sand these down a little bit, and then we'll get back to the next step. Okay, so we've gotten the pieces cleaned up, sanded a little bit, took off all the sharp edges. Now they look pretty nice. I just used a wood sander really with some 220 grit sandpaper on it to clean off the wings, and then I went over the body of the butterfly with flap disc. Did the edges of the wings with a flap disc as well, just to clean up and take off any of the sharp edges. So now it's on to welding the wings on, and we'll get to doing that now. Okay, so as you can see, we've welded the wings on and given them a little bit of a texture with the flap disc, just to kind of make it look neat. And now we're ready to move on to making some legs for it and a way to mount it to a fence or a gate or wherever you want to mount it. Okay, so I scrounged up some material to do the legs with, and I have some scrap pieces of bar stock here. One of them's straight and the other one is not so straight, but that's okay. It's we're not building a piano, we're making some yard art. So what we're going to do is probably shape these a little bit anyway, and I'll probably just use the vise and a hammer and pound them around till I get them to a shape that I like, and then I'll weld them onto the body. So we'll start that now. Alright, so as you can see, we have our feet welded on, or our legs welded on. And what we're going to do now is position the legs on this old piece of sprocket. that I have from somewhere, just scrap metal. But what I'm going to do, because it has a nice place to mount a hole, or a mounting hole there, I'm going to weld that on here like this, similar to the way I did the little one. So I had this is just another piece of an old sprocket from a bicycle that I welded on there, and it just so happens the hole is top dead center, so it makes a nice mounting point for it. I'm going to do the same thing with this piece of sprocket. I'm going to wire wheel it off and get it cleaned up, and then we'll weld it on there just like that, so we can have a mounting point. Okay, our butterfly is taking shape. The only thing left to do now is put some antenna on it. And you'll notice that the way that I put the legs on this, and the way I put the mounting point, will force it forward just a little bit, so that if it does get mounted to a gate or something and it rains, no water will get trapped between the tail of the wing and the fence, so it won't be sitting in water. Any water will just shed right off of it. So that's why I tilt it forward a little bit. Same thing on the side. You notice that sitting on its tail, the bottom of this is raised up a little, so when you mount it and you screw the screw in, then it pulls it forward a little bit so that the wings don't touch the gate in the back. Okay, now to make some antenna, which is really just straightforward, just welding some bar onto the head of the butterfly. We'll do that now. And there you have it, a new big butterfly to go with the little butterfly. So now they can be painted, or you can glue them with heat, or you can do pretty much whatever you want with them, or you can just let them rust. It would look pretty cool too, just kind of rusty. But or you can shoot a clear coat on there to maintain the swirly marks made by the grinder, and that might look pretty neat. Anyway, that's my first attempt at a YouTube video. We'll see how it goes. If I enjoy the editing process, maybe I'll do some more. Thanks.